played trombone because they watched Star Trek and they were big fans of the show. I think gorgeous cinematography, and especially all the new Star Trek, encouraged to shoot sort of cinematically and filmically. And
Star Trek. There's a version of Star Trek that most people have never seen and never will. It existed in rehearsal rooms, in rejected pilot tapes, in cut footage, and in the exhausted memories of cast and crew who worked through the night to build one of the most enduring franchises in television history. What made it to your screen was polished, iconic, and carefully controlled. What didn't make it there tells a far more raw and revealing story about how this show was actually made. Star Trek premiered on NBC on September 8, 1966, and by the time it ended its original run in 1969, it had produced 79 episodes across 3 seasons. But behind every single one of those episodes was a production machine operating under enormous pressure. Filming days regularly stretched between 16 and 18 hours. Actors were on set before sunrise and often didn't wrap until well after midnight. Some of the quieter scenes, intimate conversations in Captain Picard's ready room, reflective moments between officers, were filmed as late as 2 in the morning, long after the energy on set had been completely drained. This was not glamorous television. This was endurance work. The human cost of that schedule showed up in unexpected ways. LeVar Burton, who played the blind engineer Geordi LaForge in The Next Generation, found a creative solution to the exhaustion. His character's visor, the device that allowed Geordi to see, conveniently covered his eyes. During stretches of early filming where his character had minimal dialogue and minimal screen time, Burton would quietly close his eyes and rest while still technically appearing in the background of scenes. He remained on camera, in character, but was genuinely asleep behind the prop. Decades later, in a strange but fitting twist, Burton became the narrator of sleep stories on the Calm Meditation app, guiding listeners through space-themed tales designed to help them drift off. One could argue that Geordi LaForge spent years preparing him for exactly that role. The production's relationship with authenticity was complicated from the very beginning. Take the doors. Those smooth, futuristic sliding doors aboard the Enterprise, accompanied by that instantly recognizable whoosh sound, became a signature piece of the show's identity. That sound has been referenced in pop culture for over half a century. But here's what the studio never wanted viewers to know. The sound was completely fabricated in post-production. On set, those doors were loud, mechanical, and deeply unglamorous. They produced a harsh, clanking noise that was so disruptive it routinely drowned out the actors speaking nearby. The solution was a behavioral one. Characters almost never speak while the doors are in motion. Watch for it, and you will notice it in episode after episode. Actors pause, wait for the doors to finish moving, and then resume their lines. Editors then stripped out the mechanical clatter and replaced it with the smooth swoosh that became famous. What felt seamless on screen was actually a carefully choreographed workaround for a set that sounded nothing like the future. Even the props that defined the visual language of Star Trek had origins far humbler than the mythology surrounding them suggests. The phaser, Starfleet standard sidearm, capable of stunning, heating, or disintegrating targets, became one of the most recognized weapons in all of science fiction. Replicas fill convention floors to this day. But the original prop department built the first phasers from plastic toy ray guns pulled from the studio's existing inventory. Cheap novelty items and leftover props from earlier productions were repainted, modified, and fitted with additional components to create the illusion of high-technology weaponry. If you look closely at early episodes, the slightly toy-like quality is still visible. The plastic finish, the proportions that don't quite match what you'd expect from a military-grade instrument. Under the right lighting and camera angles, though, they worked, and their influence extended far beyond television. The U.S. military has invested significantly over the decades in directed energy weapon research, laser-based systems that trace their conceptual lineage, at least in part, to the cultural imagination sparked by Star Trek. A repainted toy gun on a TV set helped plant a seed that eventually grew into real-world defense research programs. The costumes told a similar story. Week after week, the Enterprise crew encountered alien civilizations wearing strange, elaborate, apparently original clothing. In reality, the costume department was operating like a creative salvage yard. Hollywood studios in the 1960s maintained massive warehouse archives filled with outfits from decades of film and television productions. Star Trek pulled from those archives constantly. Roman-style robes became alien ceremonial garments. Old Western outfits were repositioned as the clothing of distant civilizations. Aging science fiction costumes from earlier productions were repainted and fitted with new insignias to suggest something entirely new. The transformation was often convincing, but attentive viewers could occasionally catch a familiar silhouette, a medieval outfit resurfacing on a distant planet, or a historical epic's wardrobe rebranded as interstellar fashion. What looked like a vast and original universe was, in large part, an act of imaginative recycling. Some of the show's most celebrated innovations were born not from creative vision, but from financial desperation. The transporter, the device that allows crew members to be broken down at the molecular level and reassembled elsewhere instantaneously, is arguably the single most iconic piece of technology in the Star Trek universe. It has inspired decades of scientific speculation and serious academic research into the theoretical possibility of teleportation. But Gene Roddenberry did not invent it because he wanted to explore the philosophy of identity or the physics of matter transmission. He invented it because the original plan was unaffordable. The crew was supposed to travel to planets by shuttlecraft, requiring landing sequences, exterior filming, and elaborate approach shots every single time. For a weekly television show on a tight budget that was impossible to sustain, the transporter effect replaced all of it. It was created by filming sparkling material falling in front of a dark background, reversing the footage, and layering in light effects. The total production cost was a fraction of what shuttle landings would have required. What began as a budget-saving shortcut became the most philosophically discussed piece of fictional technology in science fiction history. The show's journey to the screen was itself a story of near-constant rejection and reinvention. Gene Roddenberry first drafted his proposal for Star Trek on March 11, 1964. The original concept featured a ship called the SS Yorktown and a captain named Robert April. It drew heavily on C.S. Forester's Horatio Hornblower naval novels. Roddenberry openly described Captain Kirk as essentially Horatio Hornblower in space, and was pitched to networks as Wagon Train to the Stars, a frame that emphasized episodic adventure over serialized storytelling. Desilu Productions, then led by Lucille Ball, took on the project, and the first pilot, titled The Cage, was filmed in late 1964 with Jeffrey Hunter in the lead role as Captain Christopher Pike. NBC's response to that first pilot was unambiguous. They called it too intellectual, too slow, and lacking in action. Even the female first officer, played by Majel Barrett, was considered too progressive for the television landscape of the time. The network rejected it entirely, but then did something almost unheard of in the industry. Instead of canceling the project outright, they funded a second pilot. The resulting episode, Where No Man Has Gone Before, introduced William Shatner as Captain Kirk and established a more action-forward tone NBC was demanding. Of the original cast, only Leonard Nimoy as Spock and Majel Barrett carried over. The rejected first pilot was not wasted. Roddenberry later reworked its footage into a two-part episode called The Menagerie, which went on to win a Hugo Award. The footage NBC had dismissed as too cerebral became award-winning television. Spock himself almost looked entirely different. In Roddenberry's early concept notes, the character was described with reddish skin, deliberately alien, even unsettling in its visual suggestion of something otherworldly. Early design sketches leaned into that direction with considerable intensity, but practical reality intervened. In the mid-1960s, most American households still watched television in black and white. On a monochrome screen, red skin would have appeared very dark, reading to audiences as something quite different from what was intended. The design was adjusted to a greenish-yellow tone instead, subtle enough to register as alien, light enough to translate on older screens. When the show finally aired in color, the effect was so restrained that most viewers barely noticed it. Spock's pointed ears carried most of the visual work of marking him as non-human, and the color question became irrelevant. Leonard Nimoy, for his part, was deeply uncertain about the role when he first took it. His concern was not about the script or the character's philosophical depth. It was about the ears and the alien physicality. He worried that the pointed ears and greenish complexion would permanently brand him as a novelty actor, someone audiences could only see as a monster or a curiosity rather than a serious performer. The emotional restraint required to play Spock, the near-total suppression of visible feeling, was also deeply foreign to his training. It required him to work against his instincts as an actor in almost every scene. What shifted his perspective was the audience. Viewers responded to Spock not as a cold, alien creature, but as someone with profound depth beneath a composed surface, emotion held in check rather than absent. Nimoy's relationship with the character evolved so significantly over time that he wrote 2 autobiographies that effectively document the arc. The first was titled, I Am Not Spock. The second, written years later, was I Am Spock. The distance between those 2 titles is a measure of how completely the role became part of him. There was a moment in Star Trek production history that carried a weight far beyond the mechanics of television. Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura, had decided after the first season to leave the show. Broadway was calling, and she had submitted her resignation to Roddenberry. Then, at an NAACP fundraising event, she was introduced to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He told her directly that her presence on Star Trek mattered, that Uhura was not simply a character but a symbol. For the first time, young black children watching American television could see someone who looked like them occupying a position of authority, intelligence, and dignity aboard a spacecraft representing humanity's future. King reportedly told her that she could not leave, that her role was too important. She withdrew her resignation the following day. Nichols later described that conversation as one of the defining moments of her life. The show's cultural impact, in that instance, was not a matter of ratings or merchandise. It was about what a black woman appearing on screen in a position of respect meant to people who had almost never seen that before. The November 1968 episode that featured a kiss between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura, one of the first interracial kisses broadcast on American primetime television, was nearly prevented from airing in the form it did. NBC pushed for the scene to be altered so that the kiss would appear involuntary, caused by telekinetic alien interference, giving affiliate stations in certain regions a way to contextualize or dismiss it. William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols responded by deliberately making every other take unusable, either by subtle movements or expressions that pulled focus from the moment. The production was eventually left with only the take in which the kiss was genuine and natural. The network got its narrative cover. The audience got the real scene. A letter Nichols later received from a white Southern viewer said that moment had caused him to genuinely reconsider beliefs he had held his entire life. A single scene in a science fiction television show had done something. The show barely survived long enough to deliver that moment. After the first season, NBC had been actively considering cancellation. By the second, the pressure was intense. What happened next was unprecedented for its era. Fans organized without the internet, without social media, without any of the digital tools that now make coordinated campaigns trivially easy. Over 2 separate efforts, it is estimated that more than 1 million letters and pieces of correspondence reached NBC's offices. Petitions spread across college campuses. Demonstrations were staged outside network headquarters. The effort was remarkable not just in its scale, but in what it represented. An audience demanding that the network honor the value of a show that ratings alone had failed to protect. NBC renewed Star Trek for a 3rd season and made the announcement publicly at a fan convention. It stands as one of the earliest and clearest examples of audience pressure directly changing a network's programming decision. The 3rd season, when it came, was underfunded and relegated to a difficult Friday night time slot, conditions that amounted to a slow farewell. The show was cancelled in 1969. But that 3rd season gave Star Trek exactly enough episode to qualify for broadcast syndication, and syndication is where the franchise truly found its audience. Reruns in the 1970s built a passionate, expansive fan base that eventually brought Star Trek back as a major motion picture series, and then as a multi-decade television institution spanning multiple spin-offs, reboots, and films that continue to be produced today. The USS Enterprise model used for filming was itself a study in concealment. The 11-foot filming miniature was detailed and carefully finished, but only on the surfaces a camera would ever see. The top of the saucer section, the nacelles, the visible hull were all meticulously painted and refined. The underside of the model was largely left incomplete, rough in places, unpainted in others. Every shot was composed from above or the side, so the underside was never relevant. That model now sits in the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. If you were to look at it from beneath, you would see the unfinished underside of one of the most famous vehicles in the history of storytelling, a reminder that even the most iconic things are often only finished on the side the audience can see. There is also the matter of one of the most quoted lines in pop culture history. Beam me up Scotty has appeared on t-shirts, bumper stickers, coffee mugs, and was even invoked by astronauts aboard the International Space Station following the death of James Doohan, the actor who played Scotty. The problem is that a line does not exist anywhere in the original Star Trek series. Not in a single episode. What Captain Kirk actually says across various episodes are variations. Beam us up, Scotty. Scotty, beam me up, or simply beam me up, but never the exact phrasing that became a cultural shorthand. The line the world remembers is a line that was never written or spoken. It is a collective false memory, shaped by decades of repetition, that became more famous than anything the show's writers actually put on the page. Star Trek joins a short list of cultural touchstones. Casablanca's Play It Again, Sam, Sherlock Holmes's Elementary, My Dear Watson, where the version that lives in public memory diverges completely from what was actually said. Memory, it turns out, often writes better lines than the original script. What Star Trek left behind was not simply a franchise. It was a demonstration of what popular culture, made under pressure and on a limited budget by people who genuinely cared about what they were building, could actually accomplish, not just in entertainment, but in the way people understood the world they lived in and the one they believed they might one day build. The version that aired was carefully constructed, deliberately shaped, and strategically edited. The version that existed behind it, chaotic, exhausted, financially strained, and quietly revolutionary, is the one that made it possible.